When love turns to obsession, a lover becomes a possession.
Over here.
An aspiring promoter's fatal devotion is captured on camera.
It was like the worst horror movie you would ever see, except it was real.
A gifted student becomes a next-door nightmare.
Her love was turning to hate. He had to get away from her.
And a wife
I'm not going to Florida.
can't say goodbye to her missing husband.
I would never have thought in a million years she was that evil.
Some women are manipulative. Some women are soulless.
Oh my.
When they're together in the same body, get out of town.
Late at night in 2017, Atlanta, Georgia. A neighbor opens her door to distressed 28-year-old Sierra Harp
Oh my God!
I need help.
and her infant daughter.
Oh my! Come in.
Sierra's legs are bleeding like crazy. She has 8 to 10 stab wounds, deep stab wounds in her legs.
Oh, what happened? What happened?
Shaking with fear, Sierra reveals her shocking story.
Oh my God, girl, what happened?
Raheem, he tried to.
Raheem did this?
The child's father, Raheem, is dead.
I killed him.
My God. Just stay there.
Sierra claimed self-defense. I had to kill him. I had to shoot him.
Sierra even has evidence, because the altercation is recorded on Raheem's phone.
911, what's your emergency?
Yes, I need an ambulance. And the police. Hurry!
But what it reveals is even more terrifying.
It was like the worst horror movie you would ever see, except it was real.
4 years earlier, 24-year-old nightclub promoter Sierra wants to take on the world.
We have a saying here that kids like Sierra, they're about that life. Sierra was about that life. That means she doesn't want to follow rules. She wants to live in a world where she can do whatever she wants to do. And she was beautiful.
See to that? Come through. Hey, girl. Oh my.
When 24-year-old Raheem Grant walks into her life, she wants him too.
Damn, girl. You want to pick that tongue up before you trip on it?
When Sierra first saw Raheem, she said to her friend, "That's my next baby daddy."
Rising rap star Raheem is impressed with Sierra's savvy, so he gives her a job promoting his gigs.
My son Raheem was great. He was a trendsetter. Everybody would always call him pretty boy. Designer shoes, designer clothes. He would always wear his hair split in the middle, wear it into 2 braids.
For the first time in her life, Sierra is a part of something big. Starstruck, she becomes obsessed with Raheem and his world. But it's a one-sided affair.
She and him became friends. That's what it was. It was a friend thing. He used to call her, you know, that's my homegirl. She was never a girlfriend, but she wanted to make it seem like she was a girlfriend. I could see the look in her eyes when she looked at him, that she really liked him.
Sierra wanted Raheem's attention. She wanted his lifestyle, and she did whatever she could to keep other women away from him.
Driven by determination, Sierra has a plan. Just 2 months after they meet, the pair are bonded for life, whether Raheem likes it or not.
So she spiked his drink. She spiked his drink with a drug, which made him drowsy. So they had sex. And after that, Raheem didn't even remember the sex. In her twisted little brain, she figured out if he could be my baby daddy, maybe I could be his wife.
Sierra gives birth to a baby girl and presents DNA proof that Raheem is the father.
Hey, Raheem.
What?
Got something for you.
Sierra thought that this baby would lead Raheem to ask her for her hand in marriage. She had these visions of grandeur.
I told you.
But instead of a marriage proposal, Sierra gets a dose of reality.
She deserves better than you.
Oh, he was mad. He was mad with her.
But look, you love her.
This child was born for one purpose and one purpose only. And once Sierra saw that that wasn't working, the child was collateral damage.
3 weeks after giving birth, Sierra walks away and abandons her own child.
Keep her. I didn't want a baby anyway.
She doesn't want to take care of a baby. She was happy to give the baby to Raheem, who was the father.
He had to make a choice to be a good dad or to just be a deadbeat dad, and he chose to be a good father.
But Sierra still has some power over Raheem. If he wants full custody of his daughter, Sierra must give the official consent.
An unwed father in the state of Georgia has no rights to the child. That's what really got him.
Sierra was using this baby as a pawn. So they had to be very delicate with her. They didn't want to upset her and have her pull the baby away.
When Sierra loses her job, Raheem decides it's wise to keep her close.
Right. Okay. Is that the last of it?
Sierra didn't have a place to live.
Yeah,
So Raheem let her move into the apartment.
this could be a fresh start.
There was no expectation she was going to stay for a long time or that they were going to be in any kind of relationship.
Hey, look, Shawty, only reason you're here is because you just lost your job.
Sierra has other ideas.
Hey, are we clear?
She had no plans to let Raheem go. With someone as unstable as Sierra was, there's no such thing as a short visit. It's either long-term or fatal.
It's a whoa, hey.
In Atlanta, Georgia, on December 29th, 2017, Raheem Grant relaxes at home with a friend.
Raheem's personal trainer came over, a woman.
Your ex-girlfriend, she's crazy, huh?
She was a friend of his, and she was beautiful.
Where they were just going to smoke some weed and then they were just going to hang out on the couch, which is exactly what they did.
Hey, Shawty, this is Elise. She's my gym buddy.
We're more than that.
Well, y'all need to keep it down because I'm trying to sleep.
Wow. I gotta go, man. I have to go.
Raheem's friend leaves, but Sierra doesn't calm down.
It enraged her and lit the fire.
Man, what's wrong with you?
I've told you 100 times, I'm sick and tired of there be women in this house. You understand?
Hey, stop. Calm down. It's okay.
That's where the argument started.
What's wrong? Hey, calm down.
It was real and it was chilling to watch.
After the argument breaks out, Raheem has a bloody face. And we know that because he recorded it.
Yeah, okay. Hey, you see that? Look at that. Look at this. See that? That's what Sierra Hart did to me.
And he says, y'all see this? Y'all see what this bitch did to me? This is what Sierra Harp did to me.
Look at this. You see that? That's Sierra Hart.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. You hear that? You hear that?
Suddenly, Sierra confronts Raheem during the recording.
She comes up behind him
Yeah. Hey!
and there's a gunshot.
My God!
Sierra shoots Raheem in the spine. Paralyzed, he's pinned to the floor.
The phone falls to the ground, and suddenly you see Sierra standing above him with a gun, screaming.
Realizing the phone is recording, Sierra has to think fast.
Screw you! This man, he beat me for 4 years. This man put me in hospital.
she sees an opportunity to turn the tables on her victim.
How do you think this was gonna go, Raheem? Huh?
She had figured out that, oh, how can I create self-defense? Well, if I have it on video, cursing at Raheem, saying that he had abused her, and this is why I'm shooting him, it doesn't make sense, but in Sierra's twisted mind, it did.
Stop! If you kill me, you're going to prison for life!
And the whole time Raheem is saying, baby, no, no, no. Don't shoot again. You'll go to prison. Don't do it.
Stop, please!
You think you can just walk away from me? From me?
For the next 13 minutes, Sierra continues to shoot 6 times in total, all caught on camera.
What did you think was gonna happen, Raheem?
Every time she shot him, she was making a point.
I told you no girls. You think you can just walk away from me? From me?
I hate you. No one else is gonna have you. Take this.
Raheem is inching his way to the bedroom, where their 3-year-old daughter is witness to everything.
She was in the bed, and my son was right there on the floor right by the bed. So she could see everything was going on, and I can only imagine him seeing the fear in his daughter's face, and that was his concern.
No,
I told you once.
I just want to help my daughter. Please listen.
Before he died, all he wanted to do was to hug his baby girl. And Sierra said, no, you don't get that opportunity. This is it for you.
No, please, please, please.
It was a straight-up execution.
Raheem had been especially dedicated to his daughter. But Sierra robbed them both of everything.
It's one thing for Sierra to take the life of Raheem, an adult. She ruined the life of her little daughter.
He was my best friend, and my son, and a great father and a brother. And everybody said it get better. It doesn't get better, not when you lose a child.
The violence doesn't end with Raheem's death. Sierra needs physical evidence of self-defense. So she stabs herself in the legs.
These are huge stab wounds. Huge stab wounds. Something that you could bleed out and die from.
I've seen self-inflicted wounds, and they're generally not serious wounds, but that isn't what happened here. But then again, nothing about Sierra was normal.
At first, the police believed Sierra's account of self-defense.
Can you explain this video?
But the video reveals a vital flaw in her story.
I don't know what you're talking about.
This video. The one where you murder an unarmed man.
So then he just hits play. And she's watching.
After the first gunshot, it's clear to see.
Where are your injuries, Sierra?
Her legs aren't stabbed in the video. She stabbed herself afterward. And she watches for about 5 seconds, and then she just turns and just starts looking at the detectives again, just like this. Stone-faced. Stone-faced, staring at the detectives.
Sierra was the architect of her own demise. Thank God.
In 2019, Sierra Harp is convicted of 5 counts of aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during a crime, and voluntary manslaughter. She is sentenced to a total of 125 years in prison.
At the end of this trial, I'm not sure I've ever seen somebody who is so evil and manipulative as Sierra Harp.
Sierra couldn't bear the thought of Raheem with another woman. If she couldn't have him, no one would.
Her main goal, I'd rather see him dead first. And that's what she did. She took his life. because she's not crazy. She's straight evil.
In 14 seasons of Deadly Women, I have never seen a case like this. One of the worst cases of obsessive stalking I've seen. She was an unstoppable train of obsession. This is a textbook case of what not to do.
1980, in the coastal community of Carlsbad, Southern California. 21-year-old Linda Riccio arrives on the doorstep of her new boyfriend, Ron Ruse.
Linda Riccio was a smart, vivacious, and very pretty woman.
Babe, what's going on?
I got thrown out. I got nowhere to go.
Come on in.
They both worked at a car dealership, and Ron was a mechanic and she worked the front desk area. So they met each other and they began dating.
Linda showed up at Ron's apartment with all of her belongings packed in her car.
Don't cry.
Ron was the type of person that was very welcoming and would have extended a helping hand.
Hey, you can stay here till you get back on your feet.
They were just dating casually, and the next thing he knows, she's moved in with him.
You're a godsend. There are more bags in the car.
Really?
I don't think Linda's mother threw her out at all. I think the whole thing was a manipulation to get into Ron's life.
Linda gives up work to study and settles comfortably into domestic life with Ron.
Linda was also enrolled at San Diego State and had big dreams of becoming a photojournalist.
They were very happy early on. They were getting along.
Despite her busy schedule, Linda always makes time for Ron.
I didn't know that we were going out.
It's just a guy's night.
I'm coming.
In fact, she rarely lets him out of her sight.
Linda was a huge part of Ron's life. She went everywhere with him.
Not tonight. You've got to study and I won't be late.
You're going to leave me here alone?
Whether it was at the beach surfing or at the bar hanging out with his friends, if Ron was there, Linda was there.
Linda, please don't start.
What if something bad was to happen to me?
This was a pattern that started to emerge with Linda.
All right, come.
Naturally, Ron started backing away, and that only increased Linda's need to be with him all the time.
Ron feels trapped. He quietly makes plans to end the relationship.
He had to get away from her. She was suffocating him.
I went to your work and you weren't there.
He went out and rented an apartment without telling her, and then once that was, squared away, he went back and said, "Look, I'm moving out."
I had things to organize. I'm moving out.
It did set her off. It made her angry. She felt like she was owed an explanation.
We're moving out?
No.
Ron was a thoughtful and caring person, and even though he moved out, he continued to pay the rent and the utility bills for the apartment.
I'll look after you, but I don't want to be with you.
I think all of those things sent a very mixed message. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, but that sent a message to her that maybe he still loved her.
Cheers! Well played today, man.
But Linda just can't let him go.
I mean, Ron was playing softball one night. She showed up at the field, and the harassment and the manipulation and the threats just dialed up to another level.
Is that Linda? She turns up everywhere, at work, at the beach.
Her love was turning to hate.
I saw you golfing yesterday. You looked terrible in those shorts.
She was following him, and she knew where he was going and what he was doing, and I can only imagine how he felt at that point.
Linda, please, just leave me alone.
It's okay for you to say. You're not pregnant.
She also claims that she's pregnant with Ron's child.
Yeah, that's right. I'm pregnant. So see, you can't leave me. You can't leave us. Yeah. You have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to your family.
She admitted to her own mother, "Mom, I was never pregnant. I was just testing Ron. I was just throwing it out there to see if he would come back."
6 years. That's 6 years that we had together. You just want to throw it all over. Guess what? You have to. No, you have to take care. No, wait. Come back, Ron. Ron.
When Ron moves apartments for the second time, Linda finally seems to get the message.
Ron could breathe again, and he thought, well, okay, this is over. He meets a young woman named Vicky.
Hey.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's for dinner?
Oh, we got veggies, potatoes, steak.
Yum.
Yeah?
What can I do?
This.
They were very happy together. They were getting along very well.
You know, you make me really happy.
Yeah, so do you. You know how much you mean to me, right?
Yeah.
He really hit it off with Vicky and was thinking that she may be the one.
He told his mom he was in love.
I should get back.
Yeah, that's right. We are cooking.
Yeah.
But Linda isn't giving up the love of her life without a fight.
Linda wasn't just a stalker, she was an obsessive stalker. Obsessive stalkers are among the most dangerous predators on Earth.
Linda Riccio has a new target in her sights.
Linda started stalking Vicky. No surprise there.
It becomes clear that this is a situation out of hand.
In October 1987, Ron takes out a restraining order against Linda.
By the time he got the restraining order, he had real concerns for his safety and his life.
But at the time, stalking isn't treated as a serious crime, especially when the victim is a man.
In 1987, it wasn't quite taken seriously that a man would be in danger of his life being stalked by a girlfriend.
The judge actually said, you should be flattered, Ron, that this woman wants you.
Before Linda can be served with the restraining order, she dumps some of Ron's belongings on his doorstep, along with a message for Vicky.
She writes Vicky a letter, essentially saying, there's no way in the world I'm going to let you have my man.
That was the point where Vicky was like, what did I get myself into here?
I'm so sorry. I can't do this.
Vicky, wait!
Vicky got scared and moved out, and frankly, can you blame her?
Ron has now moved multiple times to escape Linda.
At Ron's latest apartment block, Linda makes a fateful discovery. The apartment right next to Ron's is empty.
I'll take it.
Well, would you like to have a look at the rental agreement?
She gets an appointment with the property manager. When they were showing her the apartment, she almost immediately said, "I'll take it."
Oh, it's exactly what I'm looking for.
She surreptitiously rented the apartment on the other side of the wall from Ron. She would listen to what was going on in his apartment. Absolutely out of control.
The apartment isn't Linda's only acquisition.
Linda now has a weapon.
It was a .38, a revolver, and she told the salesman she wanted a weapon that would stop a person.
She knew exactly what was about to happen.
For 2 days, Linda monitors Ron's every movement next door. Then, on December 14th, 1987, she strikes.
As Ron approached the door to his apartment, Linda stepped out on the landing.
And she opens fire.
The first bullet hits him in the side.
Ron turns around and tries to escape down the stairs.
And at that point, he's yelling, "Help." She stands at the top of the stairs, shooting him in the back.
He ran to a neighbor's and started banging on the door and yelling.
He knows the woman who lives there, Janet. She's a nurse. Bangs on the door. "Janet, help, let me in."
Janet! Janet! Be shot!
Janet opens the door and Ron falls into her apartment, bleeding to death.
Linda doesn't know if Ron is alive or dead, and she doesn't wait to find out.
She gets in her car and drives from Carlsbad into the city of Oceanside, maybe a couple of miles away.
Ron is fatally injured.
Ron, take this person down! Person down, Ron!
He dies before paramedics arrive.
Ron was a good guy. He didn't deserve the manipulation. He didn't deserve the harassment. He certainly didn't deserve to lose his life.
So as Ron lays dying in his neighbor's apartment, Linda uses a phone booth to call the police and turn herself in.
911, what's your emergency? I just shot someone in my apartment building. Please send help.
Her initial story was that she wanted to commit suicide in front of Ron so he would feel the pain and the guilt and would have to deal with that for the rest of his life.
Ma'am, are you armed?
No. I shot him. And I was thinking about shooting myself.
I wish I had $1 for every time a murderer said, "I was gonna kill myself, but then I changed my mind."
It was like I was watching myself. I hope Ron's okay.
Of course Linda knew he wasn't okay. She intended to kill him, and she did.
In 1989, Linda Riccio is convicted of first-degree murder. She's serving a sentence of 27 years to life in prison. Her numerous applications for parole have been refused.
Linda's never getting out of prison, I can assure you of that.
All through the trial and still to this day, Linda claims that she is not at fault for the murder of Ron Roos.
Linda's love became an all-consuming obsession, and no one saw the true danger until it was too late.
Linda had a monster in her, and she couldn't control it. It eventually destroyed 2 lives. It is a myth that criminals and murderers get caught because they want to. I believe they get caught because they get sloppy.
On the outskirts of Atlantic City, a love long lost is rediscovered. Recently widowed, 45-year-old Loretta Doyle gets a surprise visit from the past.
Loretta.
50-year-old Danny Burrows.
Loretta and Danny were high school sweethearts.
Danny, it's been so long.
You look good.
Danny contacted her out of the blue, and he wanted to express his condolences.
I heard about Joe. I'm really sorry.
Thanks. I heard you got married.
Well, divorced.
That sort of jump-started their relationship.
Can I help you with those?
It's okay. Come in.
And before long, the relationship became serious.
They seemed like the perfect couple. My dad finally found what he was waiting for, and she made him happy.
Wedding bells bring more than a life companion. Loretta helps Danny heal old wounds.
Danny's children had been estranged from him ever since he left their mother. And Loretta set out to befriend them and make everything better. And it worked.
We started hanging out on a regular basis, me and my brother and Loretta and my dad. I liked Loretta. We got along really well.
Hey, honey, sorry I'm late.
It's third time this week.
They saw her as the glue that brought the family back together, but there's something they didn't know about their wonderful stepmother, Loretta.
Where have you been?
Well, Marina called and she needed my help.
The truth, Loretta.
She was addicted to gambling.
You've been gambling again, haven't you?
No, I have not.
Oh, come on, Loretta. I have a bank statement here, okay? I know what's going on.
She was dumping money in Atlantic City like it was water.
Why?
Danny is aware of Loretta's gambling addiction.
It's okay.
Come on, let's see.
He knew her flaws, he knew her problems, he didn't care. He was totally in love with her.
In spite of their problems, the couple stays strong for 7 years.
Bye.
Until they reach an impasse.
Wasn't it great to see the kids again?
Sure was.
Danny loved being reconnected with his children, but they didn't live near him. They lived in Florida.
Wouldn't it be good to see more of them?
I told you, I'm not going to Florida.
It makes sense, Loretta.
Danny's dream was to move to Florida, and apparently Loretta didn't agree with that.
You want to go to Florida? You go right ahead.
Maybe I will.
Good. But I'm not going anywhere.
Loretta, come back here.
She wasn't happy. She said she wasn't coming. She wasn't moving to Florida.
Danny threatens to go on his own. The issue is unresolved when Loretta decides to go on a short road trip with her daughter and grandchildren on August 3rd, 2007.
It's me again. The morning that they were supposed to leave,
Yay! Get out of there.
Loretta doesn't show up.
Where are you, Mom?
So the daughter calls her like 40 times, 100 times, and she still doesn't show up. And so finally, hours late, Loretta showed up, and she was totally flustered, totally upset, borderline hysterical.
Kids, get in the car. Nanny's here. Finally.
Loretta said that she and Danny had had a fight.
Danny and I had a fight, that's all. Come on, let's go. Come on.
That's why she was late.
Danny doesn't go on the trip, and when they return, he isn't at home either.
As far as everybody was concerned, he was planning on moving to Florida. So maybe he moved to Florida without telling anybody, and he did leave.
Loretta said that this woman showed up in a yellow Hummer with Florida tags, and Danny ran off to Florida with a younger woman.
When Danny's brother, Ray, visits just a week later, he's shocked to learn that no one is even looking for Danny.
And when he got there, Loretta was in one of the outbuildings, essentially taking inventory of Danny's possessions.
What are you doing, Loretta?
I'm just making a list of Danny's stuff.
You're selling his stuff?
He left me with nothing, Ray.
She told people she was selling things because she was in dire financial straits because Danny had left her for a younger woman.
I reported him missing to the police.
To Danny's family, nothing adds up.
Ray was traumatized. He absolutely felt in his bones that something was terribly wrong.
He's not missing. He's with that other woman.
And now I was ready to find out what happened.
It appears Danny Burrows has abandoned his wife Loretta and run off with a younger woman to his dream destination of Florida. But it's a story Danny's family never accepts.
Danny's family didn't give up, and they were very suspicious. They went to the police, and a missing persons report was opened. But not much was done with it.
Dad's 60. He's an adult, and he's free to move about the way he chooses. There really wasn't anything to investigate.
The family is convinced that Loretta is somehow involved.
When was the last sighting of your brother?
August 2nd.
Have a look at this.
I just knew. I knew she killed my father, and now I was mad.
It's Loretta's application for power of attorney, signed by Danny.
They caught a real break in the case when they found a power of attorney that was signed by Danny, supposedly before he left.
Except Danny's signature looks suspicious.
What's next?
I believe this is enough to get a warrant.
Great.
But no one is prepared for what they find.
I tried to keep him fresh.
When my mom had called and said that they found my father, and I was like, oh my God, where is he? And she said, in Loretta's closet.
Danny never makes it to Florida. Loretta makes sure of that the day before her family road trip.
She felt certain that he was going to pack up, go down to Florida, and take all his money with him and leave her with nothing. And she would stop at nothing to keep that from happening.
She stabbed him in the front, she stabbed him in the back, and then pushed him into the bathtub. And that was it.
It's why Loretta is flustered and running late that morning.
I would never have thought in a million years she was that evil.
She put Danny's body in the bathtub and left it there for 3 days. She said she was draining out the blood.
But the body can't stay there forever.
I mean, it's just mind-boggling that she could do something like this. Just the thought that this woman, this grandmother, chopped up her husband in little pieces.
She got out 2 large containers, like storage size. She put the upper torso in one container and the lower torso in another. And in a little handbag, she put his head.
There were 9 layers of plastic bags, fabric freshener, dryer sheets, air freshener beads, trying to cut down on the odor.
Danny's resting place is Loretta's bedroom closet.
There was no sign that my father had ever been in Florida at any point of any time. He never left New Jersey.
For 2 years, Loretta hides Danny's body before she can legally file for divorce. Then she seizes control of his assets.
No, not those, John. You take those.
She sold the house and got all of the proceeds, bought a new house, moved in, and didn't leave Danny behind. She didn't ask for help with moving those containers. She moved them all by herself.
Loretta keeps Danny's decomposing remains by her side for 6 years.
She'd go into the closet sometimes and get out the handbag with the head in it, and she would talk to Danny.
Hello, Danny. Guess what? We're moving.
I don't know what goes through somebody's mind to do that to somebody that they love.
When she was asked why for 6 years did she drag these remains around with her, she said, I couldn't bear to part with Danny. There's something loose in that head.
In 2015, Loretta Burrows is found guilty of first-degree murder for the 2007 death of Daniel Burrows. She is sentenced to 55 years in prison.
I mean, you can't have any empathy to anybody if you can do that to somebody. She has obviously no emotions at all.
In the end, the only thing between Loretta and Danny's money was Danny himself.
The judge in Loretta's case marveled at the fact that she would commit murder so that she would not have to move to Florida. And then he looked at her and said, you're really not gonna like where you're going now.
These deadly women wanted one man and one man only. Sierra Harp failed at entrapment, so turned to execution. Linda Riccio stalked a decent man to death on his doorstep. And Loretta Burrows couldn't part with the man she dismembered. All three women were driven by desperate obsession and took lethal measures because of their tainted love.
The house was still warm when they found her. A cup of coffee sat untouched on the kitchen counter, a thin skin forming on the surface, as if time itself had paused mid-breath. The television hummed quietly in the living room, morning news looping headlines no one was left to hear. Outside, the street in this quiet Ohio town looked exactly the same as it had every other morning in 1993. Neatly trimmed lawns, parked sedans, curtains half drawn, nothing broken, nothing out of place. And yet, by nightfall, everything here would be different. They said it was an accident at first, a misunderstanding, a woman who simply didn't wake up. But the smell in the hallway told another story. Sharp, metallic, unmistakable. By the time the coroner arrived, whispers had already started moving faster than the police radios. A mother, a wife, 34 years old. No sign of forced entry. No obvious weapon. Just silence. And a body that should not have been there. By sunset, the word cold case did not exist yet. No one imagined this scene would harden into one. No one believed this death would still be talked about decades later, passed between neighbors like a warning, lowered voices at backyard fences, children told not to walk home alone even years after the sidewalks had forgotten her name. The victim lived in a town where people recognized each other by the sound of their cars, where doors were locked more out of habit than fear, where crime belonged to big cities, somewhere else, on the 6 o'clock news. That illusion died with her. Investigators moved slowly through the house. Too slowly, some would later say. They photographed the room, bagged the coffee mug, collected fingerprints that overlapped and blurred, years of ordinary life smudged together. Nothing screamed murder. Nothing confessed. No shattered glass. No blood spatter on the walls. Just a body that refused to explain itself. Her husband was at work. Confirmed. Clocked in at 7:02 a.m. Coworkers swore he looked normal. Tired, maybe. Quiet. But that wasn't unusual. Grief hadn't had time to arrive yet. When police told him, he sat down hard, hands trembling, face pale. He asked the same question over and over.
How?
How could this happen? The officers wrote it down. Every word, every breath. Because sometimes, even the smallest reaction can echo years later. Neighbors came forward quickly, or at least they thought they did. One heard a car door slam around midnight. Another thought they saw a figure near the driveway, tall, moving fast, face hidden by shadow. Someone else remembered a phone ringing late at night, unanswered. None of it lined up. None of it held. By the end of the week, the town demanded answers. Police offered reassurances instead. No threat to the public. No suspect at this time. The case would remain open. Open but already cooling. Months passed. Leads dried up. The house was sold. New people moved in, unaware of the weight pressing into the walls. Evidence boxes were sealed and shelved. Detectives transferred. Files grew dusty. The death became a sentence whispered with a pause after it. The kind of pause that meant no one really knew what to say next. And then, quietly, without ceremony, the case slipped into that other category. The one detectives hate to admit exists. The one stamped in red ink. Cold case. Years turned. The 1990s ended. The town expanded. New stores replaced old diners. Children grew up. Some left. Some stayed. But the name never fully disappeared. It lingered in police records. In the mind of a retired detective who still woke up some nights convinced he'd missed something obvious. In the victim's family, who marked birthdays that never came. Every few years, a rumor surfaced. Someone had talked. Someone had been seen. Someone knew something. Each time, investigators reopened the file, held it up to the light, and found nothing new. No DNA. No confession. No breaks strong enough to survive scrutiny. The case refused to move forward, but it also refused to die. Until one phone call changed everything. It came in quietly, routed through the department like any other tip. No drama. No warning. Just a name. A date. A detail that had never been mentioned publicly. The kind of detail only someone close to the truth would know. Detectives stared at each other across a table that had seen too many false hopes. This time felt different. This time, the silence in the room was heavier. They went back to the boxes. Back to the house. Back to the autopsy report that had raised questions, but never enough to force answers. They looked again at the timeline. The gaps. The moments everyone had agreed not to question. And slowly, something began to take shape. Not a full picture. Not yet. But an outline sharp enough to cut. The town didn't know it then, but it was already holding its breath. Unmarked cars started appearing on familiar streets. Old witnesses received unexpected visits. A man who had never been more than a footnote in the file suddenly found detectives asking him where he was in the early hours of a spring morning in 1993. He laughed at first. Everyone did back then. Who could remember something so long ago? But the laughter didn't last. Because memory has a way of resurfacing when pressure is applied. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger the case became. Timelines contradicted sworn statements. Alibis leaned on people who were no longer alive to confirm them. A piece of evidence dismissed decades earlier suddenly demanded attention. Why had it been overlooked? Who decided it didn't matter? With each answer came a sharper question. And with each question, the quiet town began to feel watched again, just like it had all those years ago. The word arrest had not been spoken yet. Not officially. But it hovered. Unsaid. Dangerous. The kind of word that, once released, cannot be pulled back. Especially in a place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay buried forever. Somewhere, a clock was ticking. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just enough to remind them that time had already stolen too much. And this cold case, frozen since 1993, was finally starting to crack. The first mistake everyone made was assuming the past stayed buried. It doesn't. It waits. Detectives reopened the file like surgeons peeling back scar tissue, slow and careful, knowing one wrong cut could destroy what little remained. The paper smelled old, ink faded, corners bent from hands that had flipped through these pages decades earlier, hoping for a miracle that never came. Statements reread. Photos re-examined. Cassette tapes rewound, the voices inside them warped by time, still calm, still confident, still wrong. One detail refused to stay quiet. The time of death. Back in 1993, it had been estimated within a wide window, convenient enough to fit every alibi neatly inside it. Too neat. Modern forensic review tightened that window, narrowed it to a span of hours no one had ever seriously questioned. Suddenly, one alibi didn't fit anymore. It bulged at the edges. Stretched thin. Fragile. The name resurfaced like a body breaking water. He wasn't a stranger. He never had been. That was the problem. He had been close enough to be trusted, ordinary enough to be ignored. In the original investigation, he'd been interviewed once, maybe twice, written off with a sentence that now felt damning in its simplicity. No further interest. Detectives drove past his house before knocking. Not because they needed to, but because instinct told them to. The place looked lived in. Lawn trimmed. Porch swept. Wind chimes clicking softly. Careless. Unaware. The kind of house that doesn't belong to a killer. The kind of house people point to and say, not here. When he opened the door, time flickered across his face. Recognition. Confusion. Control. He smiled too late. Asked why they were here. His voice hadn't changed much, but something underneath it had hardened. Like a door quietly locking. They didn't accuse him. Not yet. They asked about 1993. About where he was. About who he talked to. He answered easily at first, rehearsed, as if the words had been waiting all these years for their cue. But then they asked him something new. Something only someone who had been there could answer. His eyes shifted. Just slightly. Enough. That was when the town began to feel it. That low vibration. That sense that something was moving beneath the surface. Police cars parked outside homes that had never seen them before. Old neighbors whispered into phones, suddenly unsure who they'd lived next to for decades. A woman who had testified confidently in the 90s now struggled to remember faces. A man admitted he'd lied about a timeline to protect someone who didn't need protecting anymore. Truth doesn't age well. It cracks. It flakes. And when it finally breaks, it does so loudly. Investigators uncovered something else. A call that had never been logged correctly. A call placed just minutes after the estimated time of death, routed through an exchange that no longer existed. Back then, it had meant nothing. Now, it meant everything. It placed someone at the scene who had sworn they were miles away. The suspect was brought in again. This time, the room was smaller. The air heavier. No coffee. No small talk. Just questions that circled tighter and tighter, forcing him to revisit a night he had carefully sealed away. His story changed, just enough to be noticed. A detail added. Another removed. The kind of inconsistencies that don't matter to juries until suddenly they do. Outside, word spread faster than police intended. An arrest was coming. Everyone could feel it. The victim's family was notified before the cuffs went on. They listened in silence, years of restrained grief pressing against their ribs. Hope felt dangerous now. Hope had betrayed them before. But something in the detective's voice told them this time was different. This time, the ground beneath the case had shifted. When the arrest happened, it wasn't dramatic. No chase. No resistance. Just a knock, a warrant, and the sound of metal closing around wrists that had been free for 30 years. A neighbor filmed it from behind lace curtains. The video spread before the cruiser left the street. Ohio 1993 cold case solved. Arrest rocks quiet town. The headline wrote itself. People stared at screens in disbelief. Some refused to believe it. Others felt sick with recognition. The man they waved to. The man they trusted with their children. The man who stood at community events, smiling, untouched by suspicion. All this time, carrying the weight of a secret heavy enough to crush a life. Inside the interrogation room, the suspect sat alone, staring at the table. Decades of denial pressed down on him now, the walls closing in with every new piece of evidence, slid across the surface. Photos, records, statements. The past, reorganized, weaponized. He asked one question. How did you know? The answer was simple. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits for better tools. Better eyes. Better time. Outside the station, the town gathered in clusters, voices low, faces pale. Some felt relief. Others felt exposed. Because if this could happen here, in this place, for this long, then nowhere was as safe as they believed. The cold case was no longer cold, but the chill it left behind was worse. And as night fell, lights stayed on longer than usual. Doors locked tighter. Parents held their children closer. Because the arrest didn't end the story. It reopened wounds. It forced questions no one wanted to ask. How well do you really know the people around you? How many secrets can a town hold before they rot it from the inside? Somewhere in the dark, the past finally exhaled. But it wasn't finished speaking yet. By morning, the town no longer felt like itself. It felt staged. Like a set after the actors had left, props still in place, pretending nothing had changed. News vans lined the courthouse steps. Reporters practiced the same sentence over and over, adjusting tone, chasing gravity. After 30 years, an Ohio cold case has finally been solved. Solved. The words sounded clean. Final. It lied. Nothing about this felt finished. Inside the station, the suspect's name sat printed on paperwork for the first time under a new heading. Defendant. Ink that carried weight. Ink that erased decades of anonymity. Detectives watched him through the glass, the same way they'd watched dozens before, searching for cracks, tells, signs of surrender. He sat still. Too still. Hands folded. Jaw tight. A man not surprised by consequences, only annoyed they had arrived late. They began with facts. No accusations. Just gravity. The revised time of death. The call records. The witness who had finally admitted the truth after all these years, voice breaking as if confession itself were a punishment. Each piece placed carefully on the table, not as threats, but as inevitabilities. The suspect listened, eyes fixed somewhere behind the detective's shoulder, as if staring through time itself, back to a night he had replayed more times than anyone could count. He denied nothing directly. He simply adjusted. That was the pattern. It always had been. In 1993, his statements had been flexible enough to survive scrutiny, vague enough to slide past contradiction. Now, those same instincts betrayed him. Every shift created a shadow. Every clarification opened a door investigators were eager to walk through. They pressed him on the relationship, on proximity, on motive. Back then, motive had been the missing piece.
No abri.
No forced entry.
No abiesrai.
Just death sitting quietly in a house that should have been safe. But motive doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, buried under routine, resentment, familiarity. And sometimes, motive looks like entitlement. The detectives didn't say it out loud.
Not yet.
They let the silence suggest it. Let the years do the talking. 30 years of living freely while a family buried a daughter, a sister, a mother without answers. 30 years of normalcy built on a lie that had finally collapsed under its own weight. Outside, the community fractured along invisible fault lines. Some rallied behind the arrest, clinging to the idea that justice, delayed though it was, had finally arrived. Others recoiled, defensive, insisting on caution, on presumption of innocence. He's lived here forever, they said. He wouldn't do something like that. As if time erased violence. As if longevity equaled virtue. Old photographs surfaced. Yearbooks. Barbecues. Smiling faces now recontextualized, every expression scrutinized for hints of darkness. The town began rewriting its own memory, scene by scene, searching for moments they'd missed. That argument at the grocery store. That sudden move. That strange comment, laughed off at the time. Memory is dangerous like that. Once doubt enters, it rewrites everything. The victim's family stayed mostly silent. Cameras waited. Statements were drafted and redrafted, grief translated into language safe for public consumption. Privately, emotions moved faster. Anger surfaced first, not just at the suspect, but at the years lost, the birthdays uncelebrated, the children raised with absence instead of answers. Closure felt like a myth invented by people who didn't have to live with the consequences. Investigators worked late into the night, knowing the window was fragile. Cold cases don't forgive mistakes. Every decision would be dissected, every assumption challenged. Defense attorneys were already circling, prepared to argue contamination, memory decay, investigative bias. 30 years was a long time, long enough for doubt to grow teeth. They needed something unshakable. They found it in a place no one had looked hard enough before. A piece of physical evidence dismissed as inconclusive in 1993 had been preserved, barely. Advances in forensic testing did what time could not. It spoke. Quietly. Precisely. Enough to place the suspect closer than he'd ever admitted. Close enough to erase coincidence. When detectives confronted him with it, something shifted. Not confession. Not remorse. But recognition. The understanding that the past had finally caught up, armed with better science and longer patience. His shoulders sagged. Just a fraction. The room felt smaller. He asked for a break. He asked for water. He asked if anyone remembered how cooperative he'd been back then. They did. And now, cooperation wasn't enough. The charge was filed. The date set. Bail denied. The words moved through the legal system with mechanical indifference, indifferent to the lives they altered. By evening, the suspect sat in a cell, fluorescent light humming overhead, 30 years of freedom reduced to a concrete bench and a thin mattress. The town exhaled, then inhaled sharply, because relief brought new fear. If the system could miss something this big for this long, what else had it missed? Who else had slipped through unnoticed? The arrest didn't restore faith. It challenged it. And beneath the headlines, beneath the noise, one question refused to fade. Why now? Why did the truth choose this moment to surface? Was it technology? Guilt? A witness finally unable to carry the weight? Or was it something simpler, darker, the understanding that time was running out and secrets rot fastest when their keepers grow old? The night settled heavy over Ohio. Streetlights cast long shadows that felt unfamiliar again. Somewhere, a family sat with photographs spread across a table, tracing faces with trembling fingers, trying to reconcile justice with absence. The cold case had been reopened, then cracked, then shattered. But as the town learned, breaking the silence was only the beginning. Because the closer the truth comes to daylight, the more violently it fights to stay hidden. The courtroom smelled like old wood and new tension. Polished benches. Scuffed floors. A place designed for order now struggling to contain history. The first hearing didn't decide guilt. It decided direction. And direction mattered. Because from the moment the defendant entered, shoulders squared, eyes forward, the town split again, this time in public. Cameras clicked. Pens scratched. The judge's voice cut through the room, measured, indifferent, as if 3 decades hadn't just collapsed into this single morning. The defense moved fast. They had to. 30 years was their weapon, not their weakness. They spoke of faded memories, contaminated evidence, witnesses shaped by time and suggestion. They called the investigation creative. They implied desperation. A department embarrassed by an unsolved cold case, looking for redemption. The prosecution didn't flinch. They didn't need to. They spoke of patience, of restraint, of facts that hadn't existed in 1993, science that had waited quietly while lies aged poorly. They spoke of consistency where there had once been chaos. And they spoke the victim's name out loud, firmly, refusing to let it dissolve into legal abstraction. The defendant listened without expression. If fear was there, it hid well. He'd had decades to practice. Outside, the town learned how quickly routine could fracture. Local businesses debated whether to hang signs supporting the victim's family or stay neutral. Churches filled with conversations that slipped from prayer into argument. Old friendships strained under new suspicion. Because once a secret is exposed, people start wondering who helped keep it. A former neighbor came forward unprompted. He said he'd remembered something else. A detail so small it embarrassed him to mention it now. A light on at an unusual hour. A car idling longer than it should have. Back then, it hadn't seemed worth reporting. Now it haunted him. Investigators listened, cautious but attentive. Every late memory carried risk. But sometimes, guilt sharpened recall. Then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, typed brief, unemotional. It referenced the night in question with unsettling specificity. Not enough to confess. Just enough to prove knowledge. Detectives debated its origin for hours. Was it the defendant? A sympathizer? Someone else entirely who had waited too long to speak? Handwriting analysis went nowhere. Fingerprints were clean. The letter joined the evidence pile, another unanswered question demanding patience. The defense seized on it immediately. Unreliable. Anonymous. Manipulative. They argued it poisoned the jury pool, that the entire town was now compromised by rumor and media saturation. They requested a change of venue. The judge delayed the decision. Another pause. Another breath held. The victim's family avoided the spotlight as much as possible, but grief has gravity. It pulls attention whether it wants to or not. In private, they revisited the past with a clarity sharpened by anger. Conversations replayed. Warnings dismissed. A feeling, once fleeting, now sharpened into regret. They wondered how many times the truth had brushed past them unnoticed. Detectives returned to the timeline again. They always did. This time, they focused on the hours after the death, not before it. Who had benefited from confusion? Who had steered conversations away from certain details? A subtle redirection here. A confident assertion there. Patterns emerged. Not of violence. Of control. They interviewed a former officer who had worked the original case. Retirement had softened his voice, not his memory. He admitted, reluctantly, that pressure had existed back then. Pressure to reassure the town. To avoid panic. To close doors rather than open them. He didn't accuse anyone outright. He didn't have to. The implication hung heavy in the air. The system had failed quietly. And failure had consequences. As pretrial motions stacked up, the defendant's composure finally slipped just once. It happened in a hallway, cameras unexpectedly close. A reporter shouted a question about motive. The defendant stopped. Turned. His face hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. The outburst lasted seconds. It played on repeat for days. People argued about it endlessly. Was it stress? Frustration? Or something closer to truth pressing against the surface? At night, detectives worked through boxes marked miscellaneous. The category of last resort. Items once deemed irrelevant now glowed with potential. A receipt. A voicemail transcript. A note scribbled by a patrol officer who had since passed away. Small things. Dangerous things. Because cases aren't always broken by revelations. Sometimes they're broken by accumulation. The prosecution found something else, buried deep. A prior incident. Not charged. Not documented thoroughly. Just a complaint filed and quietly resolved. Different circumstances. Different outcome. Same name. Same address. It painted a picture no single piece of evidence could complete on its own. They added it to the board. The town waited. Not patiently. Not calmly. Every delay felt personal now. Justice delayed wasn't just justice denied. It was justice aging badly, warping under scrutiny. The change of venue was denied. The judge ruled the town would face its past where it happened. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Some nodded. Others stiffened. No one left unaffected. The trial date was set. That night, the defendant made a phone call from jail. It was brief. The content sealed. But guards noted his voice. Steady. Focused. Not panicked. Whatever he said, it wasn't a goodbye. The cold case had evolved into something else entirely. No longer a question of what happened, but of how it had been allowed to remain hidden. Accountability stretched outward now beyond one person into systems and silences and choices made in the name of comfort. The town slept lightly, dreams interrupted by flashing lights that no longer belonged only to memory. Because when a secret survives 30 years, it doesn't go quietly. It fights. It reshapes everything around it. And the closer the trial drew, the clearer it became. This case wasn't just about a death in 1993. It was about everything that had happened since. The trial began without ceremony. No dramatic music. No raised voices. Just the slow, deliberate unfolding of something that had been waiting 30 years to be seen. Jurors filed in, eyes forward, carrying the quiet weight of responsibility they hadn't asked for. Some recognized faces in the room. Some recognized names. In a town like this, distance was an illusion. Everyone was connected somehow, whether they admitted it or not. The judge reminded them to remain impartial, to ignore the noise outside, to focus only on the evidence. It sounded reasonable. It sounded impossible. The prosecution opened with restraint. That, more than anything, unsettled the room. They didn't shout. They didn't speculate. They walked the jury through a morning in 1993, minute by minute, detail by detail, stripping it of nostalgia and replacing it with inevitability. A coffee left untouched. A television humming to no one. A death that didn't look like murder until you stared at it long enough. They used the phrase cold case carefully. Not as a failure. As a promise deferred. The defense countered with confidence sharpened by time. They spoke of doubt as if it were a shield. Of memory as an unreliable narrator. Of science as a double-edged sword that could cut truth as easily as it could reveal it. They reminded the jury that the defendant had lived freely for decades. That no one had accused him then. That certainty built on hindsight was still uncertainty. The first witnesses were gentle ones. Neighbors. Co-workers. Friends of the victim who spoke of routines, habits, small details that felt painfully intimate now. The jury listened to descriptions of a life paused mid-sentence. A woman who planned meals, remembered birthdays, locked doors out of habit, not fear. The ordinariness of it all made the outcome harder to swallow. Then came the investigators. Current detectives testified first, careful to explain how the case had been reopened, how technology had evolved, how assumptions had been challenged. They described the moment everything changed, without dramatizing it. Just a shift. A realization that something didn't fit anymore. The defense pressed hard. Why now? Why not before? Why did it take 30 years? The answer landed heavier than expected. Because the truth didn't have the tools it needed back then. Because patience isn't the same as negligence. Because cold cases don't mean forgotten cases. They mean unfinished ones. Then the courtroom heard the voices from the past. Recordings played. Interviews conducted when hair was darker, voices steadier, futures wider. The defendant's own words echoed through the room, younger, confident, unburdened. Jurors leaned forward as inconsistencies emerged, subtle but undeniable. A time changed here. A detail adjusted there. Nothing explosive. Everything cumulative. The defense objected often. Some objections sustained. Some overruled. The rhythm of the trial took shape, tension rising and falling like breath under pressure. Outside, reporters updated headlines by the hour. Inside, time slowed to a crawl. The forensic expert took the stand late in the afternoon. The room sharpened instantly. This was the spine of the prosecution's case. Not emotion. Not memory. Data. They spoke carefully, aware of the skepticism baked into any science applied retroactively. They explained methods in plain language. What had been impossible in 1993. What was routine now. How preservation had mattered. How one overlooked fragment had survived long enough to speak. The defense tried to shake it. Suggested contamination. Suggested coincidence. Suggested probability wasn't certainty. The expert didn't argue. They explained.
Calm. Precise.
Unmoved. By the time they stepped down, the jury understood one thing clearly. This wasn't guesswork. The victim's family sat motionless. Grief didn't erupt. It pressed inward, contained, disciplined by years of disappointment. The sound of the defendant's name spoken again and again felt unreal, like hearing a word too often until it lost meaning. Midweek, the anonymous letter returned to the spotlight. The prosecution acknowledged it carefully, contextualized it, stripped it of mystery. The defense attacked it relentlessly, framing it as manipulation, distraction, poison. Jurors watched, absorbing the subtext. Even without the letter, the case stood. With it, questions multiplied. Then came the witness no one expected. A former friend of the defendant, older now, slower, voice roughened by regret. He admitted he'd lied in 1993. Not to protect a murderer, he insisted, but to protect normalcy. To keep things from getting complicated. He said he'd convinced himself it didn't matter. It mattered. The courtroom felt smaller as he spoke. His testimony didn't rewrite the case. It bent it, just enough to show how fragile truth had been all along, how easily it could be nudged off course by fear of disruption. The defense cross-examined hard, highlighted inconsistencies, suggested memory decay, suggested influence. The witness didn't break. He didn't need to. His guilt had already done the work. By Friday, exhaustion clung to everyone. Jurors rubbed temples. Attorneys spoke slower. Even the judge looked worn. The trial paused for the weekend, the tension suspended midair. Outside, the town buzzed. Conversations replayed testimony like sports highlights. Opinions hardened. Lines drawn. The trial didn't bring unity. It exposed fault lines that had always been there. At home, the defendant sat alone, replaying the week in silence. Decades of practiced composure strained under the weight of public scrutiny. This wasn't 1993. This wasn't a quiet interview in a familiar room. This was a reckoning, and it had momentum. Sunday night fell heavy. No one slept well. Because when a cold case finally reaches a courtroom, it stops being history. It becomes a mirror. And not everyone likes what they see staring back. The jury would return. The testimony would continue. And the past, long restrained, was nowhere near finished. Monday arrived without relief. The courthouse doors opened, and with them came the sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Jurors returned quieter than before. The weekend had not softened them. It had sharpened them. You could see it in the way they avoided eye contact, the way notebooks opened immediately, as if hesitation itself felt dangerous now. Whatever doubts they had brought into the trial were being ground down, reshaped by repetition and weight. The prosecution resumed, with intent. This phase wasn't about building the case anymore.
It was about tightening it.
They brought the jury back to the house. Photographs filled the screens again. The same rooms, the same angles. But now, after days of testimony, the images felt different, less neutral. The prosecution guided the jury through the scene as if walking them through a memory that refused to fade. They lingered on thresholds, on sight lines, on the places where sound would travel and where it wouldn't. They talked about silence, how no neighbors reported a struggle, how no signs of forced entry existed, how violence, when committed by someone familiar, often leaves fewer scars on a room than on a life. The implication didn't need to be stated. The jury followed it naturally. The defense objected. The judge allowed it. Next came the medical testimony. Not new, but reframed. The original coroner's conclusions were read aloud, followed by modern reinterpretation. Subtle differences. Not contradictions, but clarifications. A timeline refined. A mechanism better understood. The cause of death hadn't changed. The understanding of it had matured. The defense pressed again. Evolution of science doesn't equal truth, they argued. But the argument felt thin now, stretched too far. The jury had heard too much to believe the case rested on a single advancement. Then the prosecution did something unexpected. They rested. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The defense looked momentarily unsettled. This wasn't rushed. This was confidence, the kind that doesn't need to fill every silence. The burden shifted. The defense called the defendant to the stand. It was a gamble. Everyone knew it, even the defendant. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if pacing his steps might steady the past beneath his feet. He raised his hand, swore the oath, sat down. For the first time in 30 years, he told his story without the protection of anonymity.
His voice was calm, practiced.
He spoke of friendship, of routine, of a morning that had started like any other. He denied violence.
Denied motive.
Denied opportunity. He reminded the jury of the years between then and now, of a life lived openly, of no prior charges, no pattern. He spoke like a man narrating someone else's life. Direct examination painted him as patient, cooperative, a victim of timing and technology. The defense leaned into the idea that history had caught him unfairly, dragging him into a narrative he didn't belong to. They used words like tragic coincidence, misinterpretation, tunnel vision. Then came cross-examination. The prosecutor didn't rush, didn't accuse, didn't raise their voice. They asked about small things.
Times, routes,
habits. They compared answers from the stand to statements recorded decades earlier. They didn't highlight the differences. They let the jury notice them on their own. The defendant corrected himself once. Then again. The prosecutor paused, let the silence do the work, then asked him to explain why his memory had improved in some areas and faded in others. The defendant bristled.
Not openly.
Just enough. They moved to the call records. Asked him to describe his understanding of the phone system in 1993. He answered confidently. Too confidently. The prosecutor introduced documentation that contradicted him. Not dramatically.
Casually.
Like it was expected. The defendant hesitated. Just a beat. Just long enough. The room felt it. Then came the question everyone had been waiting for. Why hadn't he mentioned the late-night contact back then? He said he didn't remember it. The prosecutor asked why he'd referenced it in a private conversation years later, overheard and now testified to by a witness with nothing left to gain. The defendant's jaw tightened. He said people misremember things. The prosecutor nodded, then reminded the jury that misremembering had been the defense's explanation for everyone else, too. The tension peaked without sound. No gasps. No shouting. Just the quiet collapse of certainty. When the defendant stepped down, he avoided looking at the jury. For the first time, his composure looked rehearsed rather than natural, like a performance running out of energy. The defense rested soon after. Closing arguments came faster than expected. The prosecution spoke of patience again, of time as both enemy and ally. They reminded the jury that justice doesn't expire, even when memory fades. That reasonable doubt must be grounded in reason, not comfort. They didn't ask the jury to fix the past. They asked them to acknowledge it. The defense urged caution, warned against rewriting history, against punishing a man for the failures of a system. They appealed to fear, to uncertainty, to the idea that conviction would not bring the victim back. Both were right. Only one mattered. The judge instructed the jury carefully. Deliberation would begin immediately. As the jury filed out, the courtroom remained frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. 30 years of waiting had condensed into a hallway and a locked door. Outside, the town waited with them. Phones buzzed. Radios murmured. No one knew how long it would take.
Hours. Days.
Longer. Inside the jury room, the evidence spread across a table scarred by countless other decisions. They began with a vote. Not unanimous. Not even close. Discussion followed.
Slow.
Methodical. Painful. They talked about science, about memory, about doubt, about what it meant to convict someone for a crime committed before some of them had even been born. They returned to the same question again and again. If not him, then who? By nightfall, one thing was clear. This verdict would not come easily. And whatever it was, it would change the town forever. Because the cold case had finally reached its most dangerous moment. The moment where truth and doubt face each other alone, behind a closed door, with nothing left to hide behind except conviction. And conviction, like silence, can be devastating. The night stretched long over Ohio. Streetlights flickered like hesitant witnesses, casting shadows that seemed to whisper the secrets of 30 years past. Inside the courthouse, the jury debated quietly, voices low but sharp, dissecting every testimony, every photograph, every recording that had been laid bare over the past week. Time itself seemed suspended, caught in the friction between memory and evidence, between what was said and what was left unsaid. The defendant waited in his cell, not pacing, not muttering, just sitting, hands folded, eyes fixed on the wall, staring at a place where the past and the present collided. He had faced interviews, cameras, interrogations, experts, witnesses, cross-examinations, and still, nothing had touched him enough to crack his composure fully. But even the calmest masks show tiny fissures, and tonight, they would start to appear. In the jury room, tension thickened like smoke. One juror spoke louder than the others, rattled by a small detail in a witness statement. Another countered, insisting that circumstantial evidence could be just as damning when layered correctly. Arguments circled back and forth, exhausting the patience of even the most stoic. They were not just deciding a verdict, they were deciding whether 30 years of shadows should finally be recognized in daylight. Outside, the town seemed suspended too. Windows glowed long into the night.
Phones rang silently.
Conversation stopped abruptly when someone mentioned the courthouse. Rumors, speculation, and gossip swirled with the intensity of a storm no one could see, but everyone could feel. The arrest had been shocking, but the trial's slow, deliberate pace made the shock permanent. People were learning what it meant to live under the weight of a secret finally revealed. Back inside, a witness from the original investigation was called unexpectedly. He hadn't wanted to testify. Age and fear had restrained him for decades. But he had been persuaded, or perhaps compelled, by something in the week's events. His voice was fragile but determined. He recounted a conversation he had overheard in 1993, something that had never been properly logged. His testimony didn't scream guilt. It whispered it, a subtle thread weaving through the tapestry of the case. Jurors leaned forward instinctively, sensing the gravity in the gaps and pauses of his words. The prosecution didn't need to embellish. They let time do the work. They let memory and evidence collide in front of a jury, creating a picture of inevitability. They didn't speak of vengeance. They didn't speak of revenge. They spoke of truth, patient, relentless, and finally unshakable. Every timeline reconstructed, every contradiction revealed, every fragment of evidence analyzed, it all pointed to a single, chilling reality. Someone had taken advantage of trust, of familiarity, of the complacency that allowed evil to hide in plain sight. The defense tried one last tactic. They introduced character witnesses. Friends and family who swore to the defendant's good nature, his decades of contribution to the community, his consistent reputation. They spoke in measured tones, carefully, as if trying to dilute the accumulated weight of 30 years' worth of suspicion. They reminded the jury that appearances can be deceiving, that decades of normalcy suggested something other than guilt. But the prosecution countered effortlessly, showing how ordinary behavior could coexist with extraordinary secrecy, how someone could live, interact, and appear wholesome while hiding a darkness no one suspected. They emphasized the difference between intent and appearance, between the public life and the hidden life. The jury sat, absorbing, digesting, weighing each element against the other, knowing that their decision carried the heavy burden of time itself. Late into the night, a key piece of evidence resurfaced, one of the original crime scene photographs, overlooked in 1993, now analyzed with modern technology. A shadow, a shape, a placement inconsistent with any innocent explanation. Nothing new to the case on the surface. Everything new under scrutiny. The prosecution highlighted it carefully, letting the jury connect the dots themselves, letting realization dawn slowly but inexorably. The defense objected, but the objection faltered under the weight of decades and technology. The jurors glanced at one another, unease flickering across faces that had been stoic for hours. They understood the magnitude of what they were seeing. It was not a confession. It was evidence. Cold, undeniable, precise. A whisper of the past shouting in clarity. Meanwhile, the suspect in his cell tried to hold onto control. He had survived 30 years of anonymity. 30 years of casual conversations, unnoticed behaviors, fleeting observations. Now each day in court eroded that control. Each testimony, each photograph, each reconstructed timeline stripped away layers of protection he had worn so carefully. And though he still appeared composed, there was a tension in his jaw, a hardness around his eyes that betrayed awareness. The walls were closing in, slowly but surely, and time had finally caught up. By 3 a.m., deliberations took a darker tone. Jurors revisited inconsistencies, argued about the reliability of memory, the trustworthiness of witnesses, the weight of forensic evidence. They debated motive and opportunity with surgical precision. Every word mattered. Every pause mattered. Each realization added to a growing sense of inevitability. They were not just weighing guilt. They were grappling with the moral gravity of time itself, how justice interacts with delay, how secrets once hidden exert influence decades later. Outside, the town lay restless. Lights burned in homes along quiet streets. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Some wept quietly. Others whispered suspicions to anyone willing to listen. 30 years of routine and denial could not protect the town from the tremors now moving through it. A community once tranquil, now vibrating with the knowledge that evil had walked among them, unrecognized, untouched, until now. And somewhere, in the silence between deliberations, the cold case of Ohio 1993 continued to exert its presence. Not as history, not as a memory, but as an entity alive with consequence, forcing everyone connected to confront the passage of time, the weight of evidence, and the fragility of trust. The night was long. The jury's minds were active, unrelenting. And the past, finally, had found a voice that could not be ignored. Dawn arrived, gray and heavy, creeping through courthouse windows like a reluctant witness. The jury had been deliberating for hours, perhaps overnight. Their silence felt loud, filled with the tension of decisions that could alter lives, reopen grief, and shift the fabric of a town that had long prided itself on quiet order. Every tick of the clock echoed like a heartbeat, a reminder that justice, delayed though it had been, was approaching its inevitable moment. Inside the courtroom, the defendant was brought in again. Not for testimony, not for questioning, just to sit, to observe the slow, grinding machinery of accountability. He had been calm before. Now, something subtler shifted. The stiffness in his shoulders, the slight tightening of his hands, suggested a man suddenly aware of the fragile scaffolding holding his world together. 30 years of freedom, of unnoticed actions and unchecked secrets had led to this room, this hour, this final reckoning. The prosecution prepared for closing arguments. They did not dramatize. They did not appeal to emotion beyond the truth. They presented the narrative as it had unfolded over decades, meticulous, persistent, unavoidable. Evidence layered upon evidence, witness upon witness, pattern upon pattern, until what had once been a confusing puzzle now resembled a single, terrifyingly clear image. They spoke of justice, patient and deliberate, finally seizing the moment it had long awaited. They reminded the jury that every delay, every oversight, had consequences. That the absence of action in 1993 did not erase the reality of what happened. The defense followed, cautiously, weaving together arguments of doubt. 30 years, they said, had eroded certainty. Memories shifted. Evidence deteriorated. They asked the jury to separate suspicion from proof, to distinguish theory from fact, to resist the seduction of narrative over reality. They invoked humanity. The life the defendant had led, the community standing behind him, the possibility that mistakes of interpretation could masquerade as certainty. It was a careful, measured plea, But the weight of accumulated testimony, of science, of scrutiny, had made doubt fragile. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed out. Each step on the worn floorboards sounded like a drumbeat in the hearts of those present. Outside, the town waited, restless. Conversations halted as the news of deliberation spread. Radio stations reported updates in cautious, fragmented bursts. Social media, whispers in cafes, and calls between neighbors carried tension through every corner of the community. 30 years of secrecy had created a pressure cooker, and now every soul in town felt the heat. Inside the jury room, deliberation was meticulous. They debated fact by fact, testimony by testimony. No one wanted to be wrong. No one wanted to be the instrument of injustice. Hours stretched into argument, frustration, reconsideration, and finally, reluctant alignment. Patterns became impossible to ignore. Corroborated timelines, forensic validation, and witness testimony converged. The past and present collided in a precise, undeniable mosaic. Doubt still lingered in corners, but its edges frayed with every moment of discussion. The defendant sat in the courtroom, alone, watching the process of his fate unfold in silence. The calm he had cultivated for decades now felt like a brittle shield. Each tick of the clock, each shuffle of jurors' papers, each rustle of the evidence reminded him that time, relentless and impartial, had finally caught up. Even for someone who had spent 30 years avoiding notice, no skill, no patience, no composure could delay the reckoning now pressing against the walls of the courthouse. Mid-morning, the jury returned. The atmosphere was electric yet suffocating. Faces serious. Eyes focused. Every inch of the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The judge called for the foreperson to speak. Words came slowly, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The foreperson announced the verdict. Silence fell. A collective inhalation, the weight of 30 years pressing on every shoulder. Some felt relief. Some felt shock. Some, the victim's family most of all, felt a strange mix of closure and renewed grief. Because even a verdict cannot erase the absence, cannot undo decades of waiting, cannot restore what was lost. But it could finally declare truth. The reading of the verdict echoed through the courtroom. Every listener processed it differently. The defendant's composure faltered just slightly. He had anticipated freedom, confidence, dismissal, or acquittal. What he faced now was the sharp, final clarity of accountability. 30 years of silence and evasion could not withstand the combined weight of evidence, patience, and scrutiny. Outside, the town reacted immediately. News traveled like wildfire. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Doors opened. Windows were thrown up. Emotions spilled into streets. Shock, relief, anger, and disbelief tangled in the air. 30 years of normalcy had been built on an unspoken lie. The verdict did not erase the past, but it confirmed the truth that had always been there, waiting. In private, the victim's family sat with photographs, letters, and memories. 30 years of unanswered questions now finally met acknowledgement. Tears, long restrained, fell freely. Not just grief, but validation. Not just sorrow, but recognition that justice, no matter how delayed, had arrived. The silence that had haunted them was broken, replaced with the echo of truth. The courthouse emptied slowly, leaving behind an eerie calm. The judge adjourned, the attorneys packed their files, and the defendant was escorted back to the holding cell. The gravity of the moment lingered in every corner. The cold case, once a story of mystery and speculation, had transformed into a narrative of consequence, exposure, and moral reckoning. Yet even with the verdict declared, the town remained uneasy. 30 years of hidden truth had left scars that could not be erased. The streets whispered stories long forgotten. Windows reflected the unease of witnesses who had watched, waited, and wondered. Justice had arrived, yes, but the reverberations of this case would ripple through Ohio far longer than any courtroom proceedings. Because when a cold case is finally solved, the past does not quietly disappear. It lingers. It haunts. It changes everything. The aftermath hit the town like a tremor. Not sudden, not explosive, but persistent, shaking foundations that had seemed permanent. Windows rattled with whispers of disbelief. Conversations that had once been mundane now carried the weight of history. Every corner store, every streetlight, every familiar face seemed different, refracted through the lens of a truth that had waited 30 years to be spoken aloud. The courthouse emptied, but the story did not. Newspapers filled their pages with details meticulously reconstructed from decades-old records, testimonies, and court filings. Television crews revisited the scene, replayed interviews, and analyzed the evidence with the kind of precision that only distance allows. Social media buzzed with speculation, opinion, and outrage, the digital town square vibrating with the realization that evil had walked unnoticed among them. The defendant, once invisible, now occupied headlines, discussions, and the lingering suspicion of neighbors. The family of the victim felt a hollow victory. Relief existed, yes, but it was intertwined with grief renewed. 30 years of unanswered questions had shaped lives, molded relationships, created habits of avoidance and fear. Now, as the case reached conclusion, the psychological scars were starkly visible. Every photograph, every memento of the victim, every recounting of the night in 1993 reminded them that closure was not the erasure of pain. It was recognition, validation. Justice, even decades late, could acknowledge absence, but could not restore what was lost. Detectives who had worked tirelessly on the case experienced a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Their work had been painstaking. Patience had been tested. Technology had evolved under their watch. Evidence once discarded, overlooked, or misinterpreted had finally spoken. They had pursued a truth that outlasted time itself. And yet, amidst the professional victory, they carried the reminder that one missed clue, one delayed interview, one error in judgment could have allowed decades of injustice to continue. Their celebration was private, restrained, marked by the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled rather than public acclaim. The defendant adjusted to confinement, the weight of the verdict settling into his bones. 30 years of anonymity had been a fortress, but it had been breached. Every interaction now carried scrutiny. Every visitor, every conversation, every glance reminded him that the past had caught up. Composure, once effortless, now required conscious effort. Reputation, once cultivated over decades of routine and familiarity, had crumbled in hours. The reality of accountability, delayed though it had been, was absolute. There was no retreat, no escape. Only the long echo of a cold case solved. In the broader community, reactions were complex. Some neighbors expressed relief that justice had been served, convinced that the verdict reaffirmed societal order. Others questioned the process, wondering whether decades of delay allowed errors or oversights to shape outcomes unfairly. Churches, schools, and local organizations hosted conversations, memorials, and forums. These gatherings were not purely about the crime, but about understanding the impact of unresolved truth, the ripple effect of silence, and the moral weight of collective vigilance. Cold cases, by nature, do not die quietly. They linger, occupying corners of memory, shaping perceptions, influencing relationships. In Ohio, the 1993 case had reshaped an entire town. Suspicion lingered like a shadow. Uncertainty and trust collided in everyday interactions. Friends revisited old stories, neighbors reconsidered interactions, parents spoke differently to children, and adults carried an acute awareness that appearances often conceal hidden truths. The event was no longer simply a headline. It had become a lens through which the town perceived itself. For the jury, reflection followed closure. Some jurors felt justified pride in their diligence. Others wrestled with lingering doubt. 30 years of absence in memory could never fully align with the clarity of the courtroom. They debated, privately, the role of intuition versus evidence, the weight of human error, and the boundaries of moral responsibility. Their deliberations had been careful, deliberate, painstaking. And yet, The echoes of uncertainty remained. They had rendered a verdict, but no verdict could untangle the full complexity of human history. As evening fell over the town, shadows lengthened along familiar streets. Streetlights flickered. Windows reflected the quiet unease of residents. Even the most casual passerby could sense the residual tension. 30 years of hidden truth had surfaced, altering daily life, recalibrating trust, and leaving behind the subtle, inescapable residue of collective awareness. Conversations, once mundane, now carried weight. Steps, once routine, now held scrutiny. Life, once ordinary, had been irrevocably altered. And somewhere in the silence of the night, the cold case continued its presence. Not as a story concluded, but as a reminder, a testament to patience, a warning of the fragility of concealment, a persistent echo that even the quietest towns hold secrets, and that justice, no matter how delayed, eventually arrives. The past had spoken. The town would never forget. And 30 years of silence had transformed into 30 years of understanding, uneasy, profound, and permanent. Months passed, but the town of Ohio did not return to its former quiet. The headlines faded from front pages, but their echo remained. Coffee shops, grocery stores, schoolyards, all seemed to carry the invisible residue of the verdict. Conversations paused when names were mentioned. People revisited memories, reinterpreted old events, and realized how much had gone unnoticed for decades. The cold case had solved a crime, yes, but it had also exposed the fragility of everyday trust. The victim's family moved forward in measured steps. Publicly, they expressed relief that justice had been recognized. Privately, they wrestled with the knowledge that no verdict could bring their loved one back. Anniversaries were different now, tinged with both acknowledgement and sorrow. Mementos of 1993, the photographs, the letters, the small personal items, took on new weight, each object a tangible reminder of a life interrupted and of justice delayed, but finally served. Their grief had matured, layered now with the bittersweet confirmation that someone, at last, had been held accountable. Detectives reflected on the case in quiet moments. The arrest and conviction felt like the culmination of decades of tireless investigation. They had faced dead ends, lost leads, and outdated technology. They had revisited old files, interviewed reluctant witnesses, and pieced together fragments of a story that time had tried to bury. Now, after 30 years, the puzzle had resolved, but not without leaving marks on their careers, on their reputations, on their understanding of human nature. They had learned that patience was essential, that persistence could pierce even the deepest shadows, and that truth, though delayed, could not be denied forever. The defendant adjusted to life in prison. For the first time in decades, his movements were monitored, his freedom curtailed, and his life stripped of the routines that had concealed him. He occupied his days with reflection, with quiet attempts at self-preservation, but the weight of exposure was relentless. 30 years of carefully curated anonymity could not withstand the scrutiny of evidence and memory converging in a courtroom. The realization that the past had caught him was inescapable, pressing, and absolute. Meanwhile, the town itself seemed transformed. Residents spoke differently to one another, cautiously weighing words and interactions. The idea that a cold case could remain unresolved for decades had shaken their assumptions about safety, about neighbors, about the normalcy of life. Local schools and community centers held sessions to discuss the case, not in morbid fascination, but as cautionary reminders of vigilance and awareness. Conversations about boundaries, trust, and the unseen consequences of everyday interactions became common. Even children, too young to remember 1993, were subtly affected by the town's collective consciousness. Years later, journalists returned to the story, documenting the process of cold case resolution. They highlighted the interplay of science, memory, and dogged investigation. They explored the psychological impact on families, communities, and jurors. The town of Ohio became a case study in the long shadow of unsolved crimes and the far-reaching consequences of patience, both in investigation and in waiting for truth. The lessons were universal. Nothing remains buried forever, and justice, though delayed, casts a light impossible to ignore. The echoes of 1993 lingered in the streets. Windows reflected the tension of residents who had lived through decades of uncertainty. Conversations held undertones of reflection and caution. Relationships subtly shifted as people realized how little they truly knew about the lives around them. The cold case, once dormant, had rewritten the social fabric. It had forced a town to confront secrets, accountability, and the uncomfortable realization that appearances can deceive. Yet, even in the aftermath, the mystery left residual unease. Questions lingered about what could have been noticed earlier, about the fragments of memory lost to time, and about the way ordinary life can hide extraordinary darkness. Though the verdict brought clarity, it also left gaps. These gaps reminded the town, and all who followed the story, that truth is rarely complete, that closure is never perfect, and that human perception, limited and flawed, is always challenged by time. The Ohio cold case of 1993 had been solved. A verdict declared. A town shaken. Justice served. But the echoes, the shadows, the lessons, they remained, lingering, persistent, haunting. The past had spoken clearly, but its reverberations were far from silent. The story of the cold case was no longer just about crime. It was about time, memory, accountability, and the inescapable consequences of secrets left too long in the dark. Years later, the quiet town of Ohio still felt the tremors of that night in 1993. Time had passed, headlines had faded, yet every corner, every street, every familiar face carried the invisible imprint of what had occurred. Children had grown up hearing fragments of the story, piecing together an understanding of justice, fear, and the fragility of trust. Adults walked a little more cautiously, aware that the ordinary can conceal the extraordinary. The cold case had changed not just the defendant, the victim, or the family. It had reshaped the collective consciousness of a community. The defendant remained incarcerated, a man whose life had been dismantled by the slow, deliberate hand of justice. 30 years of freedom, of routine, of unnoticed habits, had ended abruptly in a courtroom illuminated by truth. Letters arrived sporadically, lawyers visited, appeals filed, but none could erase the certainty that had finally been imposed. He had lived decades as a phantom, and now he existed as a known consequence, a cautionary figure whose every move was measured, monitored, and recorded. His world was reduced to walls and schedules, a stark reflection of the freedom he had taken for granted. The victim's family found a fragile peace. Grief, sharpened by decades of uncertainty, was tempered by validation. They could speak the name of their loved one without hesitation, without apology. They could recount memories, revisit old photographs, and remember the life interrupted without fear that their voices would be dismissed. Yet the pain never fully faded. Justice, no matter how patient or thorough, cannot restore what was stolen. It only acknowledges it. And that acknowledgement, though profound, carries its own weight. The town's landscape of memory and suspicion had shifted permanently. Residents walked streets with a renewed awareness of observation and discretion. Conversations carried subtle caution. Parents taught children lessons not only of morality, but of vigilance. Neighbors looked at one another differently, aware that even the most ordinary interactions might conceal hidden truths. Community gatherings, once casual, now contained undertones of reflection and remembrance. The case had embedded itself into the town's culture, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between trust and awareness. Detectives who had dedicated their careers to the cold case retired or moved on, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled. They spoke rarely of the case, but when they did, their voices were measured, precise, heavy with the lessons learned. The importance of persistence, patience, and methodical attention to detail was clear. They had navigated decades of misdirection, faded memories, and incomplete evidence, and they had prevailed. Yet they knew that even solved cases leave traces, echoes in families, in communities, and in the minds of those who witnessed the slow unfolding of truth. The courthouse itself, a silent witness to the decades-long struggle, remained a symbol of accountability. Its walls, lined with cases of the past, held the echoes of justice long delayed. New cases came and went, but the memory of the Ohio 1993 cold case lingered. Lawyers, clerks, and judges passed down the story, a lesson in diligence, patience, and the enduring power of evidence. It became more than a trial. It became a narrative of human perseverance against the persistence of hidden crimes. Even as time moved forward, the lessons of the cold case endured. People understood that truth may slumber, that secrets may linger for decades, but that eventually, clarity emerges. Justice does not vanish simply because years have passed. And in the quiet of the town, in the reflection of windows and the soft hum of life, the story continued to resonate, a constant reminder that darkness cannot endure indefinitely when scrutiny and persistence prevail. The Ohio 1993 cold case was closed. The perpetrator convicted. The victim honored. The town changed. Yet the story remained alive in memory, in caution, and in the silent acknowledgement that even the quietest towns carry shadows, and that time, relentless and impartial, eventually shines a light on every secret. And so, the echoes of that long unsolved crime persisted, a haunting reminder that justice, though patient, is inevitable, and that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to speak. The town, years later, carried a quiet vigilance. Every corner, every familiar street seemed sharper, as if memory itself had grown sensitive. Residents moved with awareness now. A glance across a neighbor's yard, once casual, now carried the weight of suspicion and caution. Even in ordinary conversations, there was a subtle layering of meaning, a consciousness of what could be hidden beneath the surface. Ohio was no longer naive. The shadow of 1993 lingered, teaching the town that evil doesn't always announce itself, and that ordinary appearances can conceal extraordinary darkness. Children grew up hearing fragments of the story, not all at once, not in full, but enough to shape their understanding of the world. Lessons of trust and caution were woven into daily life, alongside the mundane instructions of school, chores, and friendship. They learned that the passage of time could hide truth, that the ordinary could harbor danger, and that justice, when delayed, requires patience, awareness, and courage. Some slept uneasily, haunted by the faint whispers of a crime that had persisted invisibly for decades. The families of those touched directly by the case carried their lives forward cautiously. Celebrations and milestones were shadowed by memory. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, events once ordinary, now carried layers of reflection. Stories were retold, framed not only by grief, but by the acknowledgement of justice achieved, however late. Yet the relief was tempered. The past, once silent, remained vocal in the hearts of those who lived it, a persistent reminder that even when crimes are solved, their echoes endure. Law enforcement carried their own burden of reflection. Detectives, retired or still serving, understood that solving the cold case was not an endpoint. It was a lesson. Diligence, patience, and technology, combined with human perseverance, could reveal truth. But they also knew that decades of waiting leave scars, both on families and on communities. Each solved case brought closure, yes, but it also exposed fragility, delayed accountability, and the unsettling knowledge that evil can hide in plain sight for years. And somewhere, in the quiet streets of Ohio, the 1993 cold case continued to whisper, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a caution, a shadow, a living reminder that time can both conceal and reveal. The past had been acknowledged, but its presence remained undeniable. Its lessons, subtle but persistent, shaped the rhythms of daily life, echoing in hushed conversations, in reflective gazes, in the awareness that truth, no matter how patient, cannot be denied forever. Even decades after the verdict, the town was not the same. Windows reflected suspicion. Streets carried the weight of memory. Conversations carried the ghosts of what had been hidden for 30 years. Ohio had learned, slowly and painfully, that a single crime can reshape the moral and psychological landscape of an entire community. Justice had been served, yes, but the town itself remained haunted, not by the act alone, but by its persistence, its concealment, and the revelation of its truth. The defendant, now removed from freedom, was no longer just a name on a headline. He existed as a symbol of the hidden darkness that can thrive in ordinary life. In prison, he faced not just confinement, but the isolation of accountability, the realization that time had finally exposed everything. 30 years of evasion, of unnoticed habits, of careful concealment, could not withstand the relentless weight of scrutiny. Every day became a reminder that secrets, no matter how patient, eventually unravel. Meanwhile, the town learned to live with echoes. Memories intertwined with warnings. Families reshaped their understanding of safety, trust, and vigilance. Old friendships were reconsidered. Familiar faces, once comfortable and unquestioned, were now observed through the lens of experience. The cold case had carved a permanent fissure into the collective consciousness. It reminded everyone that evil is often patient, that time is impartial, and that truth, however delayed, will always emerge. Local schools and community centers held workshops and discussions about vigilance, morality, and justice. The case became a living lesson, not just of law, but of human nature. The story of the Ohio 1993 cold case was no longer just a crime. It was an enduring narrative of consequence, of responsibility, and of the fragile line between ignorance and awareness. And so the town lived with the shadow, the memory, the echo. They moved forward, cautiously, quietly, changed forever by a crime that had waited decades to speak. The cold case had been solved, the perpetrator held accountable, and yet the story, the lessons, the whispers, the vigilance it demanded, remained alive. Because some truths, once unearthed, never leave. They linger. They warn. They shape every life they touch. And Ohio, 30 years later, was still listening. Even decades later, Ohio's streets held a certain tension. Neighbors spoke in measured tones, eyes flicking toward doors, porches, backyards, wondering what had gone unseen. Ordinary houses now seemed to conceal histories no one could fully know. The shadow of 1993 had infiltrated everyday life. Simple acts, walking the dog, fetching the mail, waving to a neighbor, carried an unspoken awareness. Appearances deceive. Trust required caution. Familiarity was fragile. Even routine motions were now observed, considered second-guessed. The victim's family, though formally comforted by the verdict, carried an undercurrent of unease. Every anniversary, every gathering, every quiet evening brought reminders that justice, delayed though it was, could not undo the horror. Photographs of 1993 stared from walls, silent witnesses to lives interrupted. Letters were reread, diaries revisited, each item a portal back to that night, back to the unspoken fear, back to the absence that had lingered for 30 years. They had closure, yes, but the closure was brittle, tinged with shadows of what might have been. The town's law enforcement, now older, reflected on the cost of patience. They had solved the case, yet the weight of oversight and delay remained. Could more have been done? Should leads have been pursued differently? Each retired detective carried these questions quietly, aware that the line between triumph and regret is often as thin as a single missed clue. They understood, finally, that justice is not a static achievement. It is a living force, demanding vigilance, consistency, and the courage to confront the darkness, no matter how long it sleeps. Schools and local institutions integrated the story into lessons of caution and awareness. Students learned not just of law and order, but of subtle danger, of how ordinary life can hide extraordinary malice. Teachers recounted fragments of the case with careful phrasing, embedding the lessons into young minds. Observation, skepticism, persistence. Parents reinforced these lessons at home, warning children to notice details, to question instinctively, to understand that evil often lurks patiently, hidden in plain sight. Ohio's younger generation had inherited the vigilance of a town scarred but wiser. Yet shadows persisted. Late at night, streetlights flickered over empty sidewalks, casting elongated shapes that seemed alive. Whispers of the past threaded through the wind. Even the most mundane sounds, a door creaking, a branch snapping, felt amplified, carrying echoes of 1993. The cold case had left a residual unease, a psychological imprint that no verdict could erase. It was no longer about law alone. It was about the human consciousness, altered irrevocably by exposure to a hidden evil finally revealed. And still, the town could not fully exhale. Windows reflected memories as much as light. Shadows moved differently. Conversations were quieter, more cautious. Ohio had learned that history doesn't fade. It lingers, it shapes, it teaches through absence as much as presence. People woke in the middle of the night, recalled conversations long past, and realized how much had gone unnoticed, unremarked, unrecorded. 30 years of silence had left imprints on minds, a lingering tension that no trial could erase. The perpetrator, confined now for life, existed in a world defined by observation and routine. 30 years of freedom and secrecy had vanished. Every thought, every gesture, every fleeting interaction was catalogued by a system of control. The walls, the guards, the constant scrutiny, these replaced the anonymity that had once shielded him. And in that isolation, he became a living reminder that time eventually exposes everything. No matter the patience, no matter the concealment, the past cannot remain hidden indefinitely. The town itself became a living monument to vigilance. Parents spoke differently to children. Friends observed each other more keenly. Even casual gestures were interpreted with care. Ohio had learned that the ordinary could mask extraordinary darkness, that appearances were unreliable, that trust was not automatic. The cold case had become more than a legal event. It was a cultural imprint, a moral compass, a psychological echo of the danger inherent in neglect, delay, and silence. Communities in nearby towns began to study Ohio's story. Cold cases, they realized, are not just unresolved crimes. They are living entities, shaping behavior, memory, and awareness across decades. Ohio's experience became a template, a cautionary tale demonstrating the persistent influence of hidden truths, the long shadow cast by secrecy, and the enduring power of justice, however delayed. And so, the 1993 cold case continued to resonate, not as a story concluded, but as a haunting lesson. A whisper in the quiet, a shadow in the familiar, a reminder that some truths, once unearthed, do not fade, they linger, shaping lives, communities, and the consciousness of a town forever changed. Ohio had survived. Justice had been served. But the echoes, tense, quiet, persistent, would never leave.